sono le azioni anche di molti studenti, dottorandi di Edimburgo che abbiamo accolto e anche in questo momento abbiamo queste settimane a Siena, nostri dottorandi e dottorande che svolgono un periodo a Edimburgo e anche studentesse e studenti, insomma, che in varie forme, in varia misura, diciamo, hanno contribuito a consolidare questo legame. E quindi ringrazio intanto moltissimo Dougles per aver accettato il nostro invito e per essere qui. La sua lezione di oggi sarà sull'onore appunto nel mondo greco. Io passerei rapidamente la parola a Manuela per altre 2 parole di introduzione e poi naturalmente lasciamo soprattutto a Dougles.
Sì, 2 parole per ringraziare moltissimo il professor Cairns a nome anche del curriculum di antropologia del mondo antico, del dottorato. Io vorrei soltanto così dire 2 parole sul privilegio che abbiamo oggi di ascoltare il professor Cairns, che ha un profilo intellettuale, diciamo, scientifico veramente, diciamo, straordinario, non soltanto per i tantissimi progetti internazionali di cui è stato direttore, PI, responsabile, ma soprattutto per un, diciamo, un profilo intellettuale di uno studioso che veramente ha avuto il coraggio di innovare il campo dei classics attraverso, diciamo, un dialogo di altissimo profilo con campi disciplinari distanti diciamo, dalle discipline tradizionali, e mi riferisco, vi cito soltanto 2 dei grandi progetti che ha condotto appunto Cairns, e cioè quello sulla distributed cognition, da cui è uscito nel 2019 un volume fondamentale, appunto, Distributed Cognition in Classical Antiquity con Anderson, in cui appunto diciamo apre, no, il campo degli studi classici a quei grandi campi di sapere, a quegli approcci che sono quelli, diciamo, cognitivi, diciamo, in senso ampio, e quindi l'incontro tra cognitivismo e studi classici, che ha poi applicato anche all'altro grande campo di studio che Cairns ha avuto proprio il merito, io direi, di creare, e cioè il campo delle emozioni, cioè gli emotion studies, con dei progetti importantissimi, con le pubblicazioni di riferimento, insomma, fondamentali, in cui appunto tutto quel grande campo del movere, del pathos, dei pate, è stato diciamo, rinnovato veramente dalle fondamenta e indagato attraverso dei modelli teorici diversi, e quindi mettendo insieme uno straordinario rigore filologico a questa grande capacità, questa grande intelligenza di lettura, no, dei nostri testi, dei nostri mondi, attraverso in maniera, ripeto, sperimentale, aperta, e quindi con un grande contributo dal punto di vista proprio epistemologico, non semplicemente dal punto di vista classicistico. Quindi io, insomma, lo ringrazio moltissimo ed è, se non si può dire onore, certamente un grande privilegio. Grazie mille.
Grazie. Il problema è che non sappiamo cosa sia l'onore. Forse scopriamo adesso. Grazie mille Stefano e Manuela per questa bella introduzione. È davvero per me un onore essere qui a Siena per la prima volta nella mia vita professionale. Sono stato qui come turista ma anni fa. E mi dispiace che non sono in grado di fare la lezione in italiano, non sono così bravo. Allora cambio in inglese. So thank you very much again for this wonderful introduction. Thank you for the invitation. It's been something I've wanted to do for a long time, to come to Siena and talk to you all here, especially since Siena has been such a source of top-class graduate students for us in Edinburgh that I've enjoyed working with enormously. So the question is, what is honour? Well, everybody thinks they know. There's a lot been written on this topic in a whole range of subjects, but also in our subject in classical studies. But I think the topic is still relatively poorly understood, and it's relatively poorly understood in particular in classical studies. So since 2018, I've been involved in this project here, Honour in Classical Greece, with 4 Italians and a Greek and myself, so lots of Italians there, including my colleague Mirko Canevaro, whom I gather you know. So this project was funded for 5 years. In fact, because of the pandemic, it ran for 6 years. It finished in 2023, but we're still writing the publications that are coming out of that. They'll come out this year, next year, and maybe the year after. And what we're aiming at is a complete reassessment of what it is we talk about when we talk about honour in classical Greek societies. So this afternoon, I'll give an outline of what we think honour is and what kind of affiliations our project has. And tomorrow and Friday, I'll go into more detail on particular aspects. So this afternoon might be a bit ancient historical, but tomorrow will be Homer. So fans of Homer can come along tomorrow at 10 a.m. for some Homer. And on Friday, we'll be back with ancient history again. So a typical and serious failing of scholarship on the notion of honour is, as we say in the project, to ghettoize the phenomenon. So honour is typically and sometimes literally ghettoized. It's regarded as a feature only of ghettos. So of inner city youths, for example, only of lower classes. So that's a very typical phenomenon in the United States, where honour is something that gangs in the inner cities are supposed to care about. Whereas if you look into the history of the topic in scholarship in the UK, it tends to be the other way, that honour is something that aristocrats think about and not the lower classes. So there are lots of different ways of saying that honour is found in some societies but not in others, and found in some contexts in some societies and not in others. So the idea is it's the concern of one social stratum among many. It's a concern mainly of men, for example, and it's characteristic only of certain forms of social organization. So here's a recent formulation along those lines. So this is Shada Novin and Daphne Oyserman, 2 social psychologists, and they say, in honour societies, what others think matters, and vigilant attention to the possibility of losing face or losing respect is necessary. In dignity societies, so honour societies on the one hand, dignity societies on the other hand, others are de-emphasized, and what matters is one's own norms, values, and beliefs. And there are lots of different studies that categorize honour societies in the same terms. It used to be, when I started off as a student, that honour societies were found just a little bit further south than here in the Mediterranean. But now it's very much the case that they're found in the southern states of the United States. And this antithesis between honour societies and dignity societies bears a certain comparison with an older antithesis that used to be fashionable between shame cultures and guilt cultures. People used to believe in this. I thought 30 odd years ago that I had exploded that ideology. And Bernard Williams, much greater figure than myself, published a similar book in the same year. And so you might have thought that the shame culture, guilt culture antithesis was done. But in fact, it's not the case. With both of these oppositions between honour and dignity societies and shame cultures and guilt cultures, the fundamental problem isn't so much identifying honour societies or identifying shame cultures. We can find honour societies and shame cultures everywhere The real problem is finding the opposite, finding cultures in which others are de-emphasized and what matters is one's own norms, values, and belief. Because there's no society in which norms, values, and beliefs arise in a social vacuum. Now, obviously, a person can develop a reflective, personally endorsed system of values and beliefs. They can develop a belief system that's absolutely fundamental to their sense of self and to their character. But the development of belief systems of that sort is inevitably social. It happens in a certain social context, and it's not unique to any one individual. It's intersubjective. It exists not just in me, but in me and you and you and you and so on. Dignity is impossible without having an idea of self-esteem, without thinking of yourself in certain terms as worthy of a certain degree of recognition in the world. So there's no dignity without self-esteem. There's no dignity without self-respect. But where do you get self-esteem and self-respect from? Well, you get them in the interaction between your esteem for yourself and the esteem that you show for other people, the respect that you have for yourself and the respect that you show for other people, and the respect that you have for yourself and the respect that you show other people, and the respect that they show you. So dignity is acquired and performed in a social context. What does dignity mean? It means what I am worth. A claim that you are worth something only works if there's an expectation that other people will recognize that claim. It's profoundly social. All human beings, from the very earliest stages of life, inhabit a world in which their identity, their sense of self, and their claims to recognition are created intersubjectively and developed interactively as our circles of acquaintances and loved ones and connections and relationships grows through our life. So I've gone right back to the first 40 minutes of life here in this study by Andy Meltzoff and Michael Moore, which is this famous one here. This is Meltzoff. He makes these faces, and a baby who's 40 minutes old can imitate him. So this is the roots of what Meltzoff calls the like me phenomenon. There was a great scholar died a couple of years ago in Edinburgh, Colwyn Trevarthen, and he developed the idea of primary and secondary intersubjectivity. And the great sort of finding, the great outcome of a whole series of studies that he did is that in fact it's intersubjectivity that comes first. Finding out what it means to be a self is something you do with other selves. It's not that we are hermetically sealed, atomistically separated individuals, and then we discover, oh my God, there are other people in the world as well. It's the other way around. We begin interacting before we're born. There are now very good studies that show that fetuses interact with the mother's voice in the womb, and they get feedback and they respond to the feedback in the womb. So this starts very, very early indeed. There are two brilliant recent syntheses of this. So there's this book by Michael Tomasello, Becoming Human, and this book by Sean Gallagher, Action and Interaction. And the great thing about these books is that they go all the way from infant psychology to the interaction rituals and the practices of social recognition and social interaction in complex developed societies. So they go all the way from developmental psychology at the bottom and all the way up to philosophers like Axel Honneth and Stephen Darwall. So Gallagher follows Honneth, Tomasello follows Darwall. They're going all the way through people like Ricoeur and Hegel and all that sort of thing as well. But they're rooting it all in the very earliest experiences of life, which are intersubjective. There's a great experiment by Trevarthen that I must tell you about. So Trevarthen developed this theory of primary intersubjectivity in very young infants. So primary intersubjectivity exists from the moment of birth. Secondary intersubjectivity comes in when you're about 9 months old. So first of all, infants interact in dyads. They interact in pairs with the caregiver, primarily with the mother. When they're 9 months old, they begin to be able to draw the attention of someone else to a third thing. So they share their attention with another human being, and even with their eyes, they're able to direct that person's attention to something else. So that's secondary intersubjectivity. And one of the great proofs of primary intersubjectivity was an experiment that Trevarthen did, where he filmed the child of around 2-3 months old interacting with his mother. And then the next day, he played the film from the point of view of the child, the mother rather, to the child. So immediately the child begins to try to interact with the mother on video. But because the mother is statically recreating what happened yesterday and not responding to what the infant is doing now, within a couple of seconds, the infant loses interest. There's no feedback. And so it's not getting what it needs out of the interaction. That shows you how fundamentally interactive human beings are. So the distinction that underpins antitheses such as honor versus dignity societies and shame cultures versus cultures is essentially about a difference between values that are intrinsic, that are internal, and values that are extrinsic in their orientation. There's a lot of work on that by Varon and others. And in principle, these are valid categories. So there are people who are more oriented towards external validation, and there are people who are less concerned about external validation. So you can analyze the behavior and beliefs of individuals in these terms. You can analyze the behavior and beliefs of groups in these terms, and you can measure the differences between groups, societies, and cultures, including differences that have taken place through time by using these categories. So on the one hand, you've got values to which people are deeply committed, even when material success and social approval might pull them in other directions. So they stick to what they believe, even if there would be rewards in abandoning their beliefs. And those are the intrinsic values. And on the other hand, you've got values that are much more oriented towards material rewards and social approval. These are the extrinsic ones. So people who want money, people who want to be liked, are motivated to some extent at least by extrinsic values. And there is an argument that the societies that we live in, the society that you've lived in Italy since Berlusconi or before, the society that we've lived in Britain since Margaret Thatcher, the society that they've lived in the United States since Ronald Reagan. There is an argument that these societies, since the gradual breakup of the post-war consensus, have been increasingly dominated by individuals whose values are excessively extrinsic in their orientation. It's widely argued that the current president of the United States is a narcissist, that he's dependent on being liked, being endorsed by other people. And so Lord David Owen, former British politician, published this book a few years ago. Interesting title, Hubris. We'll say more about that on Friday. In the United Kingdom, we had something similar in this man. This is a person who had to resign from the office of Prime Minister when it became apparent that he and his administration were much more concerned with creating an impression, an external illusion of good behavior than with actual good behavior. So they got caught when the lies that they told to maintain a facade of public responsibility simply served to illustrate their contempt for the shared ethical norms that they should have had with their fellow citizens, and for the citizens who expected their leader to behave better, to uphold these shared ethical norms. So there's John Harris in The Guardian saying that it all boils down to one thing: contempt for the rest of us. So they told us a story. Oh yes, we are obeying the restrictions. We're not having parties. We're not getting drunk. We're not having sex in the 10 Downing Street garden or anything like that. And then we found out they were. The thing is, though, we can't assume that even these individuals, even Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, even people whose values are excessively extrinsic in orientation, we can't assume that they have no internalized, intrinsic moral norms whatsoever. And even in contemporary first world societies obsessed with consumerism, materialism, image, and celebrity, it isn't the case that everybody thinks these are the right values to have, and it isn't the case that everybody endorses the people who behave in those ways. So the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic values is useful for analyzing the ways in which individuals and groups tend more that way or the other way, and the extent to which changes and differences in socioeconomic structure foster different mixtures of these things at different periods is a legitimate object of sociological and historical inquiry. But as far as I'm concerned, there's no group and no historical society, and perhaps except in the most extreme pathological cases, no individual either, in which you don't find some combination of extrinsic and intrinsic values. And the interesting thing is, despite strong reasons for believing that the societies we live in, Western societies, and especially elites in Western societies, are subject to an ever stronger pull in the direction of extrinsic values, the paradox is that educated elites within these societies have used and continue to use labels such as shame culture and honor society precisely to denigrate and to patronize internal groups within their own societies and external societies. So honor societies are things like inner city teenagers. Honor societies are immigrants of various origins. In the United States, the honor societies in the South, not in the Northeast and the Northwest. The honor society in the South is supposed to derive from the fact that the South was settled by the Scots, people like myself, and our huge attachment to honor. But if you go further back to the shame culture, guilt culture antithesis, you find that the characteristic examples of shame cultures were Native Americans or the Japanese. Are the Japanese very much like Native Americans? Southern Europeans also. So you lot belong to the club as well, but also North Africans, people from India, people from Pakistan, Muslims in general, and of course the ancient Greeks. So is any of this true? I would say it's not. It's possible just to be interested in praise. It's possible just to want to be liked. So you pursue these things just as ends in themselves, without having any commitment to develop the qualities for which you're praised or liked or esteemed. But that would be abnormal. That would be a pathological perversion of the normal pattern, because the normal pattern is that people prize the excellencies for which they want to be praised and respected, and they try genuinely to have those excellencies and genuinely to manifest them. So here's where the classics comes in. Aristotle. So as Aristotle reminds us in the Rhetoric, it's pleasant to be admired and it's pleasant to be honored. But for Aristotle, this pleasure isn't an end in itself. So as he tells us in Book 8 of the Ethics, some people simply see honor, so getting the esteem of other people, as a means to an end, as a way of ingratiating themselves with those people and a way of obtaining something that they want from those other people. But he says there are yet other categories of people for whom seeking honor is about looking for well-informed other people to confirm your own idea of yourself. So for Aristotle, the pleasure of being honored lies in trusting the judgment of those who say we're good people. And this is why honor for Aristotle isn't the final end of life. Because if we like being honored because it means people think we're good, then what we really want is to be good. We want to be good people. So as Aristotle repeatedly notes, this is precisely why people seek the esteem of other people. They want to confirm their own sense of themselves as somehow good or good at something. So esteem, ancient Greek time, validates and enhances self-esteem. There's a relationship between esteem and self-esteem. There's a relationship between how you view yourself and how you want to be viewed by other people. And consistently, Aristotle sees honor, time, as something that confirms our own positive view of ourselves. So the value of time for him isn't about being popular or just about being praised. It's about confirming how we think of ourselves. So it's confirming the idea that we have the qualities that we value and that we think other people should value as well. So as my fellow Glasgow graduate, Adam Smith, once put it, we want not just to be praised, we want to be praiseworthy. We want not just to be respected, we want to be respectable. We want to have the qualities for which we are respected. I'm sorry these PowerPoints are all garbled in that way, but I think you get the idea. So for Adam Smith, this is what human beings are like. It's a fundamental aspect of human sociality. More recently, the American literary scholar, Sandy Welsh, has emphasized the need to demystify honor and treat it as one kind of motivation that all are subject to. And these two people, Geoffrey Brennan and Philip Pettit, so Brennan is an economist and Pettit is a philosopher, they have dismissed as a grievous error, a serious mistake, the common assumption that concern for honor is only found in some kinds of society, only found in small-scale, face-to-face societies. They've dismissed the idea that it's purely aristocratic, and they've also dismissed the idea that it's only found in marginalized countercultural groups. It is found in all those contexts, but that's because those people care about things that all the rest of us care about too. So different individuals, groups, and societies care about praise, esteem, and respect for different reasons, in different ways, and on the basis of different qualities. But none of these entails an absolute distinction between societies in which individuals want to see their self-image validated and other societies in which they don't. In all societies, people want to see their self-image validated. Now, Aristotle is typical of Greek thought in this respect. So in his fictional dialogue between the Sicilian tyrant Hieron and the lyric poet Simonides, Xenophon has Hieron draw a strong distinction between respect and fear, esteem and flattery. And this is to emphasize the relation between respect that you get from other people, esteem that you get from other people, and self-respect and self-esteem. So according to Hieron in this passage, the tyrant never knows that when people praise him, they're being sincere. So he can never be sure that their praise is genuine. So Simonides has just argued that tyrants are the luckiest people alive because other people obey them, they defer towards them, they show them respect, they show them admiration, and so they benefit from the greatest of human pleasures, Simonides says. They have the esteem of their fellow human beings. But Hieron observes that if you have to force them to show you respect, then it's not respect at all. So if they respect you only because they're afraid of you, that is not genuine respect. So all that you're seeing here is the extreme imbalance in power between the tyrant and the subject. And as Hieron says here, it seems to me that honors timai are quite different. Real honor, real acts of respect and esteem are different. They indicate sincere appreciation of the qualities in the other person that the person who experiences respect values. So the tyrant is like any other normal human being. He doesn't just want to hear nice things about himself. He wants people actually to believe those things. He wants them to believe that those things are true. So if only genuine respect and genuine esteem will work, then what the tyrant wants, like everybody else, isn't just praise, but validation. He wants to be praiseworthy as well as to be praised. These links between esteem and self-esteem, links that in fact highlight how honor and dignity are complementary and interdependent, these are very much supported by the anonymous late 5th or early 4th century treatise preserved in part in the Protrepticus of Iamblichus, the anonymous Iamblichi. So as it's excerpted, this text begins, I think it's the wrong passage. Still, yeah, there we are, yeah. So as it's excerpted, this text begins with the topic of excellence, virtue, arete. But then we quickly move on to reputation. So in fragment 1, the author has been saying that he's following Hesiod here, it takes a long time to develop virtue. And then this fragment here, fragment 2, he says, similarly, you have to start young and behave consistently for the rest of your life if you're going to acquire doxa, reputation. And it's only then, after you have shown repeatedly that you are a person of a certain sort, a good person, it's only then that people will believe that you are what you seem to be. And one of the reasons for this is that people are reluctant to praise. So they don't just confer praise on others just like that. They don't go around saying, oh, you're brilliant, you're wonderful, you're fantastic. It takes a lot to persuade them that you are brilliant, wonderful, and fantastic. So, as he's saying here, they don't find it pleasant to honor other people. You have to give them a reason to honor you, because these people think they lose something when they honor others. They think if the other person is praised, then they are somehow benefiting at their own expense. But it's also a matter of caution against being deceived. They don't find it pleasant to honor, but also they're worried that if they accept another person's reputation at face value, then that person may be tricking them. They may not actually be what they seem to be. They may be fooling them for some advantage of their own. And these doubts about the accuracy of your reputation, the phonos, the malicious envy that makes people reluctant to praise, and the fear of being deceived can be countered, can be dispelled, only if you can consistently demonstrate that you actually do possess the qualities on which your reputation rests. And so the argument is, and it's an interesting argument from a 5th century, 4th century point of view, virtue is developed in exactly the same way at exactly the same time as reputation is. You can only get the reputation if you have the virtue, and therefore if you value reputation, which he assumes everybody does, you will need to be good. You will have to be virtuous. because otherwise there are plenty of people out there who are trying to catch you out, who are just looking for the first sign that you are not what you seem to be. So virtue creates trust as well as reputation, as we see in this fragment. So this is a kind of Darwinian argument. What he's arguing here is that there's a selective pressure from the environment that selects for features of the individual that fulfill some of the requirements of the social environment. So time, honor, isn't something that people give you indiscriminately. People need to be convinced that others actually have the qualities that deserve to be honored. Other people have no interest whatsoever in encouraging us to seem good, to pretend to be good. And other people are constantly on their guard against deception. So other people, he also makes clear in this passage here behind us, they will not give you esteem because esteem is something they also value for themselves. Social comparison comes into it. These are resources that other people want, resources that they are not very willing to share. So the author believes that people will eventually recognize that your qualities are what they seem to be when it becomes undeniable that you really do possess them. That may be too optimistic, but even if it is, it's clear from the argument, and it's true, I think, that actually possessing the qualities you claim to possess will substantially improve your chance of recognition and esteem. Boris Johnson was found out in the end. Some of us were not convinced at the beginning, but he was eventually found out by others in the end. And so the distinction between honor societies and dignity societies is based on a false antithesis. Intrinsic and extrinsic values are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. And they're central to all human societies, including the society of the ancient Greeks. The context of those values in the ancient Greek world is subject to considerable cultural variation in comparison with ours, but still ancient Greek time is a reflex of a very general human concern. We're all concerned for esteem, validation, respect, and recognition. We don't tend to talk about that in English very much anymore as honor. Honor has become a kind of old-fashioned term in English, but still what we're talking about in substance, regardless of the terms we use, is something that's very fundamental to human sociality. It's not typical only of primitive societies. It's not a matter of being obsessed with other people's views to the expense of your own views. It's not about having no intrinsic values of your own. And as I said already, this antithesis between honor societies and dignity societies didn't arise from nowhere. It arose essentially from these people who are all related to each other as teacher and pupil, and are the founding fathers of North American anthropology. So they are the thinkers who developed primarily the antithesis between shame culture and guilt culture. And in at least some of its simpler forms, the shame culture, guilt culture antithesis involved a similar contrast between societies whose norms depended on external sanctions and others whose norms depended on internal sanctions. So shame cultures were societies in which people didn't really care that much about what was right and wrong, but they cared about being found out. They cared about punishment and disgrace, as opposed to North American Puritans who cared about the good being right. The classicist Arthur Atkins preferred the label results culture over shame culture, but he was talking about the same thing. He believed that in a results culture, where only the results matter and not your intentions, and this is allegedly the situation in the Homeric poems, according to Atkins, in a results culture, the individual cannot fall back on his own opinion of himself. And this is the crucial phrase. For his self only has the value which other people put on it. So there are people in the world, or there were people in the Homeric poems who took their valuation of themselves entirely from other people. And even the great French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu believed something similar at one stage in his career. In this 1965 volume, which has been absolutely seminal for the study of honor in classical contexts, Bourdieu says, the point of honor is the basis of a moral code of an individual who sees himself always through the eyes of others, who has need of others for his existence, because the image he has of himself is indistinguishable from that presented to him by other people. That would be very, very paradoxical indeed. So if it were true that your image of yourself was indistinguishable from the image that other people had of you, if the value that you placed on yourself was identical to the value placed on you by other people, what would happen when other people thought you were worthless? What would happen when other people disrespected you? If these things are true, then all you can do is accept that valuation. Remember what Novin and Oyserman said. So in honor societies, when it's a matter of losing face or losing respect, people show vigilant attention. What do they mean? They get angry. If you disrespect them, they get angry. They retaliate if you show them disesteem or disrespect. But if the only thing that matters is what other people think, you have no basis to say that these other people are wrong. If you have a basis to say that those other people are wrong, then it's not only their opinion that matters. So the fact that individuals in any society do in fact guard against loss of face and loss of respect and react defensively or angrily when they're threatened with disrespect or when they lose face shows that in a scenario of that sort, what is in play is a discrepancy between the way the person thinks of themselves and the way that other people think of them. So there are two images coming into contact here. My image of myself and the image that other people have. And I want those other people to share my image. When they don't share my image, I don't accept what they say. I want to demonstrate that my image of myself is the right one. So they talk here about losing face. Who is it who introduced the concept of face into Western anthropology? Famous figure, American, 1950s, 1960s, did his field work in Edinburgh, based on a stay in the Orkney Islands in the north of Scotland. It's Irving Goffman. So in a number of seminal works, including this one, Interaction Ritual, but also The Performance of Self in Everyday Life, Irving Goffman demonstrated 70 years ago, and Gloria Origi has recently reaffirmed, that maintaining face in all societies is an interactive process. It involves interacting negotiations between the way we present ourselves, the way our self-presentation is received by others, and the way that we receive their self-presentation. So Goffman talks about demeanor. Demeanor is how you present yourself. And the way that you present yourself, your demeanor protects your face. So your image of yourself that you want to see validated. And that involves, as Goffman also says, taking a certain line. So in a conversation, in a social interaction, my demeanor involves my protecting my face and taking a certain line, acting in a certain way that I want to see the other person endorse. And if an interaction goes well, that's what happens. So normally, cooperative interactions mean that neither of the two individuals will challenge the others. So if the other is saying, that they are excellent at Greek prose composition, the person they're talking to is very unlikely to say, no, you're rubbish at Greek prose composition. They tend to go with what the other person is doing, simply because it's more respectful to do so. So in these situations, there are two parties. So I am projecting my demeanor, I am taking a certain line, I am concerned about my face, but if I'm only concerned about those things, the interaction will not go well. I have to be concerned about all those things in the other party as well, because the other party is. So both parties come to the interaction, projecting a certain line, protecting their own face, enacting a certain demeanor, and you have to recognize not only how you're performing, but also how the other person is performing. So your demeanor protects and projects your face and involves your line, but always in a context where you have to pay attention to other people's face and other people's line as well. So social interaction is continuously bi-directional. You have to monitor how you're doing, your own demeanor, but you also have to monitor how you're responding to the other person. We all know how badly an interaction goes if one person talks all the time, just like this one now. You will get the chance to talk at the end, so that kind of makes up for it. But dominating behavior, not thinking of the other party to the interaction, is a failure of interaction. So the social world that is in play here, the social world that's being presupposed here, isn't one in which the self only has the value that other people put on it, as Atkins would have it. It's one that, as Goffman puts it, in which the individual must rely on others to complete the picture of him, he uses sexist language, of which he himself is allowed to paint only certain parts. So we paint part of the picture, but the others color it in. We interact, we cooperate in this creation of identity. So Gloria Origi, in her wonderful book Reputation, talks about reputation as our second self. It's our social self. And the interactive nature of these processes is highlighted in the anonymous Iambichi. So the community on whose evaluation honor depends has an interest, as we saw, in determining what excellence consists in. So we get praise, we get reputation, only not if we go around projecting our own idea of what's good. We'll only get it if we are projecting their idea of what's good. In order to get esteem and respect from them, we have to do things that they value. So this means that the selective pressure exercised by the social environment is also complemented by the aims and needs of the individual. It's assumed that reputation is something that any rational person would want, just as malice, phonos, is something that any rational person would want to avoid. But as in Aristotle, as in Xenophon in the Hiero, and as in Adam Smith, people don't value reputation for its own sake. They value it in order that the qualities that they possess and value should be recognized by others. So just as trust is the absence of doubt that other people are what they seem to be, so the pursuit of reputation, as we see here in these slides, is the desire to be recognized as the person you want to be. So you're not just seeking the reputation because reputation is nice to have. You want the reputation that endorses your aims of the kind of person that you aspire to become. So this is not about conformity. It's not about just conforming to other people's expectations. It's not what Kant would call heteronomy. It's neither heteronomy nor autonomy. It's a mixture of self and other. As the anonymous author observes in fragment 4, a truly good person, he says, pursues reputation not by putting it on like a garment, not by putting it on like a jacket that you can either put on or take off, but so it's not as though you've got someone else's jacket, a good person's jacket, and you put it on and then you're a good person. You have to be a good person yourself. They want reputation for their own virtue, their own excellence. So such a person wants to be praiseworthy rather than merely praised, respectable rather than merely respected. So as we'll discuss a little bit more tomorrow, reputation, trust, and virtue are co-created in ways that allow us to manifest the qualities that are valued by ourselves and by our communities. Trust is very important in these fragments, if you notice. We'll talk more about trust tomorrow. But how many times have you heard anyone in classical studies or ancient history telling you that trust is an important product of honor? How many times do they tell you that honor is a matter of cooperation and trust? So this means that, contrary to what's sometimes asserted by the Hilkeskamps, for example, the role of the community or the group on whose evaluation honor depends, the group that gives you honor, isn't simply that of an audience. So the others are not simply umpires in a competition. This is what Elke Stein-Hilkeskamp and Karl Joachim Hilkeskamp say. So they're following Georg Simmel and his model of competition. So you've got two people competing and you have an audience or a judge. And the audience or the judge award the prizes to the two competitors. They say that's what honor is like. But that's not the case. As we've seen, the community is an active participant in its own right. It's the community that determines what excellence is. And the community has a strong interest in determining what excellence is. The community wants us to do the things that the community values. And if we do, we will get honor in return. So the community will not reward purely individualistic interests, purely individualistic values. And this is another recurrent theme in ancient presentations of honor. So this is Aristotle in Rhetoric, Book 1, Chapter 5. And he defines honor, time, there as a sign of the positive reputation for beneficence, euergesia, semeion euergetikes eudoxias, he says. So people are honored for what they do, he says, or for what they can do for other people. So there is an element there of heteronomy. It's the other people that decide what gets honored, not us. And some of Aristotle's examples of honor, for example, grants of land, the best seats in the theater, statues, maintenance at state expense, and so on, show that he's indicating of something that was very important in his own society in the 4th century BC. He's thinking of public benefactions and public honors. But he also talks about gifts, so interpersonal marks of honor as well. And it's the interpersonal ones that we see, especially in Xenophon's Hierome. So there, this is the passage we've looked at again, previously, we're looking at it again. So the tyrant is contrasting the servile performance of people whose deference, whose respect is enforced people who are simply afraid of the tyrant, with the freely given honors of genuine marks of esteem, which involve such purely interpersonal marks as standing up in a person's presence to show respect. But again, the fullest and most nuanced exposition is in the anonymous Jamblichie. So for the anonymous Jamblichie, again, virtue is about benefiting others. So the reputation we get depends on the virtue that we develop, and virtue is not primarily about us, it's about what we do for other people. So he points out quite clearly that excellences are qualities of individuals. So my excellence at, say, running is my excellence, but perfecting excellence, he says, involves developing these abilities for good reasons, for good ends, for good purposes. And he says we achieve this to the fullest extent when we benefit the greatest number of people. So the fullest excellence a citizen can achieve in the kind of society that he has in mind is achieved by benefiting others. And he says we benefit others not by redistribution, not by the redistribution of wealth, but by all contributing to the common good and benefiting the laws and the system of justice that allow everyone to live at peace, to bring people together within the community. So the development of individual virtue happens in tandem with the acquisition of social esteem, and it doesn't just serve the interest of the individual. It creates what this author calls eunomia. So law-abidingness, or the state of having good laws and obeying those good laws. And that state of affairs benefits everyone, benefits the whole community and all its members. So this is the complement of the argument in fragment 2 of the same treatise. In fragment 2, the community, in its own interests, exerted control on the individual, pressure on the individual to develop the qualities that the community valued. And then it rewarded those qualities with honor and reputation. Here in this passage, virtue, the virtue that reputation rewards, lies in the interests of the greatest number of your fellow citizens. These are all communal values. These are all interactive values. They're not individualistic values. So this means that though it's possible to regard the community as an audience of interactions between two elite individuals, for example, even in that scenario, the role of the community isn't just that of a judge or an umpire. It's not just the referee in a contest. Even in that situation of two individuals competing, the community is a player, the community is a participant. But it's also characteristic of classical Athenian thought in this area to make the community not just one participant in a three-way relationship. So you've got two people competing and the community setting the standards. It's much more common, in fact, to make the community a player in one-to-one relationships, dyadic relationships in its own right. And as my colleague Mirko Canevaro probably told you when he was here, this is the logic of the Athenian system of public honors. It's the logic of ancient Greek euergetism more widely, because euergetism is conceived as a relationship of reciprocity, of charis, between the individual and the community. But that logic, of course, also holds good in purely interpersonal relationships, one-to-one relationships between people. We go back to this definition again. So we started from this quotation from Novin and Oyserman, and you see that that quotation places at the very foreground individuals in honor societies paying vigilant attention to what other people think. So it's all about the individual and what they can get from others. As we saw already, that doesn't presuppose absolute dependence on other people. because when other people don't validate our self-image, we get angry and we try to do something about it. We want to see this image we have of ourselves validated. So it's not absolute heteronomy. But you notice that this vigilant attention they're talking about here comes into play not only in relation to the possibility of losing face, it also comes into play when there's a danger of losing respect. So as I've said already, Novin and Oyserman frame the contrast purely in terms of an individual's orientation towards the values of others or the values that they hold themselves. But even if we concentrate precisely on what they say, the dynamics of honor in their own formulation, then we can see there's a lot more involved than just the aims of an individual who's dependent on the opinions of other people. So the individual not only seeks esteem and not only wants to avoid disesteem in the eyes of an audience, they also project this self-image that they want to see validated. So this means that they're looking for what Stephen Darwell calls appraisal respect. So they're looking for a reward for their excellencies. They want to see other people recognize that they are good at something. They have skills and qualities. So Darwell calls this appraisal respect. So appraisal respect matters to a person as an individual, and it depends on the person's own idea of what counts as excellence, but validation of that excellence depends on the content, the extent to which that idea of excellence is endorsed and promoted by the audience. So it's about the interaction between individual and group values, and both parties in this interaction have important roles to play. When it's a matter, on the other hand, of trying to avoid the danger of losing respect, an individual isn't performing excellence before an audience. They are stating a claim to what Darwell calls recognition respect. So recognition respect rests on a claim that some aspect of a person's worth, or you might say a person's dignity, should be recognized by the other. And this is fundamentally a matter of one-to-one interpersonal relationships. So Novin and Oyserman's formula is intended to center more or less entirely on an individual's dependence on other people's approval. And yet, though it's very limited, it still presupposes many roles and many ways of dealing with honor. So it's not just that we seek praise and seek esteem, we also give praise and give esteem. And it's not only that we seek and give esteem in the sense of appraisal respect, it's also claiming and showing recognition respect. There are multiple things going on here, multiple parties, multiple actors in interaction. So recognition respect. The focus in that context is a relationship of reciprocity in which each party benefits from mutual recognition. So this is the sense in which time in Greek is fundamental to mutual relationships, positive relationships, cooperative relationships, relationships that are described in terms of charis and philia. And this is why in Xenophon's Hiero, again, Simonides is able to counter Hieron's anxieties about the sincerity of others' respect by observing that genuine respect from other people will be nurtured, will be increased by our own respect for them. You only get it if you give it. So we honor other people for the benefits that they confer upon us, that one of the benefits that they confer upon us is honor itself. And mutually honoring people benefits both of the parties mutually. So you probably know that honor is often described in terms of a zero-sum game. If I want some, I have to take it from someone else. If I get some, someone else has to lose it. And even when it's only a matter of appraisal respect, even when it's only a matter of others' admiration for our excellencies, this is not necessarily the case. But when it's about my respect for you and your respect for me, honor cannot possibly be a matter of a zero-sum game, because it's cooperative. And cooperation doesn't start unless through cooperating we get something more than we would get if we didn't cooperate. All cooperation is non-zero in nature. Now, Darwall's later writings distinguish not only between appraisal respect, essentially admiration or praise, and recognition respect, recognition. He also distinguishes between two kinds of recognition respect. So Darwall is a Kantian, and therefore what he's looking for is recognition respect of another person insofar as they are a person. The best reason for respecting a person is because they are a person, according to him. And he distinguishes that from honor respect, which is about the roles that people play or the rank that someone holds, the head of department, the professor, the bus driver, the policeman, whatever. And he says these are not genuinely second personal. Still, honor respect meets his original condition for recognition respect. It involves giving appropriate consideration or recognition to some feature of its object in deliberating about what to do. Recognition respect, according to Darwall, is a case in which you have to do something about it. You can't simply ignore it. So, for example, if it's a policeman, the very fact that he's a policeman means that even if you don't care about the law, even if you don't care that this is a crime and you shouldn't do it, you still care about the fact that he's a policeman. His role is something that you cannot ignore. So that is what Darwall would later on call honor respect. And he says it's not purely second personal because it doesn't involve mutual accountability and equal authority or dignity. And there is a sense in which Darwall's distinctions between honor respect, recognition respect, and appraisal respect are useful. But the point I want to make is a simple one. In ancient Greek, all of these things are T-men. Ancient Greek doesn't distinguish between honor respect, recognition respect, and appraisal respect. It only has T-men. And all of those things that Darwall talks about are covered. And Greek terminology also highlights something that I've mentioned already. Greek terminology, in some ways, brings out aspects of honor that English, for example, doesn't. Because time isn't just a matter of the respect that a person gets from other people. It's not just a matter of the esteem that a person gets from other people. The same term in Greek, time, also denotes the individual's claims to those things, their claims to recognition and esteem. So the lines have all got messed up here, but I think you'll maybe be able to see the point. So in this passage, time refers to the claim that a person wants to see endorsed, the claim to recognition respect, as well as the recognition that they want to receive. So we see this especially where time is a matter of performing a certain role. So a role may command other people's actual respect, and a role may be allocated as a token of esteem or respect, but still there's a sense in which the term time clearly designates the role itself and the prerogatives, what you are entitled and able to do that belong with it. So this passage here is about the gods in Iliad 15. The references off the bottom of the slide. And this is where Poseidon is saying that he is homotimos with Zeus and with Hades. So they got an allocation of time. They have equal time. So it's about gods. It's a passage from poetry, and it's very early, but it illustrates my point perfectly. The time that Poseidon is talking about in this passage is precisely his freedom to exercise his prerogatives without being impeded by anyone else. He's saying, I have equal time to do what I want in my own area. It's about positive freedom. So it's about the role that he has and the prerogatives or the entitlements that come with that role, which entitle him to the respect of other gods and human beings. So time in ancient Greek is very often a matter of who the agent is and what an agent does. It's not just a matter of how the agent is regarded by other people. And this is the sense in which all citizens in Athens have time. The time of a citizen is a claim to be honored by other people, but it's not the honor of other people in itself. It's the claim, it's the status, it's the role. If you think of Hesiod's Theogony at the same time, what does Zeus do in the Theogony? He hands out time to all the gods. And that entitles them to respect from human beings, but the time is the job, if you like, that is handed out. If you think of the Athenian state, as described by Aristotle in the Politics, for example, he says, archai, offices, are timai. So the arche is something that entitles you to time, and the time is used as a name for that very entitlement. If in the Athenian state you suffer atimia, it's some of those prerogatives that you lose. If you suffer atimia in Athens, it means there are certain things that you cannot then do. You cannot do what a citizen with full time is able to do. So we're talking here about rights. So I should have a slide here for Mirko Cannivaro's most recent book in Italian, Lateni dei diritti, which is all about how Athens is a city of personal rights based on time. And this is noticed outside classical studies as well in this book by Frank Henderson Stewart, where he says one of the senses of honor is as a claim right. So honor isn't necessarily always what you get from other people. It's what you already have that entitles you to get something from other people. So it goes both ways. It's something you have and it's something you get. Think of other examples. Well, there's eidos. So in this passage here from Iliad 22, Hector is thinking of how he's failed to protect his people, and now some baser person than he is will say something bad about him. So they will say bad things about him. And he says, ai deomai troas kai troadas hel kesipeplus, he says. I feel shame before. So the verb is ai deomai. It has a direct object in the accusative, and in context like this, we translate it as I feel shame before. But what about passages like this? So this is the Dolomeia in Iliad 10, and Agamemnon is saying here, don't choose a companion for this mission. Out of the eidos that you feel in your heart, don't pass over the better man and take the worst, giving way to eidos and looking to his degree, looking to his rank. So that kind of eidos isn't shame. That kind of eidos is a positive regard for the status, the rank, or the qualities of another person. It's respect. So eidos means both shame and respect. It goes both ways. It's about how I see myself when it's a matter of shame. I don't want to be criticized by other people, but it's also about how I see the other people themselves. I respect those other people. If you think of the adjective aidoios in Homer, in almost every single instance of its use, it doesn't mean anything to do with shame. It means deserving respect, respectable. Think also of hubris. So here's Aristotle's definition of hubris. You will see this again and again on Friday. And for Aristotle, hubris is a way of getting it all wrong, not just about other people's claims to honor, but also about your own. So hubris involves thinking too much of yourself and not enough of other people. It's about overstating your own claims and forgetting about the claims of other people. So the Greek terminology explicitly acknowledges that these things go both ways. They're interactive and bidirectional. There's an interplay between esteem, respect, self-esteem, and dignity. And this is precisely what Goffman was talking about. It's also something you find in face threat politeness theory by Penelope Brown and Steve Levinson. So they talk about positive face and negative face. They talk about the positive face that you project and the negative face which is vulnerable to incursions from other people. So we're looking at how we are performing towards them, and we're looking about how they are performing towards us. It's always bi-directional in this way. Moving up the scale of European philosophy, it also chimes with the insights of Axel Honneth, developing the views of Hegel on Anerkennung, recognition, that recognition is something you only get if you give. It's fundamentally mutual in character. It's not just that demanding recognition without ever giving it is impractical. It's not just that it's atypical. People tend not to do it. And it's not just that it's transgressive. It's even more than that. It's even stronger than that. The point is, if you demand recognition from someone else, if as the master, you say to your slave, recognize me, then what you're doing is also recognizing the slave. Because recognition can only come from someone that you recognize as a potential source of recognition, if nothing else. And as I suggested already, developmental psychology suggests that this goes all the way back to the very beginnings of human life. Self is always bound up with other selves. It's the idea of ourselves as agents is an interactive idea that we develop in interaction with other agents. And so Charles Taylor puts it very succinctly, a self requires other selves. Individualism just isn't right. Self-presentation can only take place where other selves are presented. And this bi-directional, two-way focus on the presentation of self and the presentation of the other is absolutely fundamental to what it is to be a human being, to what it is to be a socialized human being. All cultures have to calibrate the notion of self-worth, that's sometimes called dignity, not just against other people's willingness to validate its claims, but also against the need to show esteem for others and recognition of other people's claims. It always has to be mutual, it always has to be reciprocal. And this is in fact what honor is all about. It's not this purely heroic, purely masculine, purely self-centered, purely individualistic pursuit. It's much more deeply embedded in mutual relationships than that. So that's it. Thanks very much.
So thank you very much, Professor Douglas Cairns. This is a very rich and enlightening lecture, and there are so many things that Douglas Cairns has brought to our attention, has illustrated, and so I'm sure that it would be a rich discussions. Many things resonate with things that also Mirko Caravado, who has very much collaborated with Douglas Cairns, and of course build upon this common shared interest for Time. And last year he went to a conference we had in Siena, and he talked about Euergesia and Time, and so that resonates with what you also considered in your lecture. And the recent book, La Terra dei Diritti, is all centered upon the belief that Time means also the claim for rights, and particularly in Latinian democracy, had this space to manifest that way of intending Time. And I will add that also Philotimia in Athens shares this.
As you've written yourself,
Yes, not only for that. I'm still studying upon that because it's a really challenging word and notion, but it demonstrates how rich and complex this question is. Well, I know that's always difficult to start a discussion, so maybe I would try to begin.
Okay.
That would be helpful for further questions and interaction. I have many things that I want to ask, but I will just try to be brief. The first thing is, where are the limits of Time within a community? If there is collaboration, if there's need of collaboration to build the self in the individual, in the social interaction, and all of this is shown very clearly. But where are the limits? You made the example of the master and the slave. Is there a limit there? In the mutual construction of this process, dynamic, the social dynamic, man, woman, citizen, non-citizen, stranger, and insider. Can one trace a map of where is the limit?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Maybe we can talk about philotimia later, because that's also an interesting question. But yeah, so one answer to your question, Stefano, is that honor is not a substantive value. So one reason why there are no limits is that honor Time can attach to anything. It will attach to anything that a group, no matter how small, values. So one of the interesting things is that Time is in fact the ancient Greek word for value. So it just means value. This is what they value, whatever it is. So it doesn't mean that it will be a certain type of behavior, a certain quality, a certain set of qualities. So a small group of the very worst people in the world that you could possibly imagine, if they all agree that the right thing to do is this, then for them that's the honorable thing to do as well. So Thucydides in 382, of course, notices that when the values of a community change, it's different things that attract Time. It's not bound to any single set of behavior. So that's one reason why it's potentially unlimited. You can value anything. Some people value, some communities value rather perverse things, as the way we do in our own societies now. Celebrity, for example. But we can't say that our society doesn't value those things. It clearly does. And the second answer is, let's take slavery as the test case, because it is maybe the most difficult case. So Mirko and I haven't entirely agreed 100% on hubris and slavery. In the same way as Nick Fisher and I haven't entirely agreed 100% on hubris. But I think we're coming to a consensus. So Mirko, David Lewis, and myself published a book last year, only last year, on slavery and honor. And one of the things we show in that book is that regardless of what the civic position of slaves is in classical Athens or in any other Greek polis, even if they have no time in the sense of being citizens or anything like a citizen, they have no civic role. They have no role that will be recognized in the polis by other fellow members. Nonetheless, in particular relationships with their masters, with other slaves, with other members of the community, they can enjoy time. So, for example, it's typical of a slave who's maltreated to complain about the maltreatment. Slaves don't accept necessarily absolutely everything that's done to them. There's the Lesis curse tablet, where he says, you know, I'm in this terrible place and this guy's driving me really hard and it's not right. Get me out of here. So this is someone who has a sense of how they deserve to be treated, even though they are an enslaved person. There are lots of cases, of course, of slaves acquiring huge esteem within the Athenian state to the extent that they become free and then metics, and in some cases also citizens, in rare cases too. But even where it's a matter of the master, who's clearly in a much more powerful, much more dominant situation than any slave that he owns, and his slaves, nonetheless, masters don't rely on coercion at all times. If they did rely on coercion at all times, they would be like Hiero in Xenophon's Hiero. They would be constantly paranoid about assault and violence and death. But in fact, it seems that they weren't. And so Xenophon in his Oikonomicus advises the master to treat his slaves like kagathoi. So reward them when they do well. Leave them unsupervised to carry out their own duties and reward them when they carry them out well. So these are all cases where you have terrible abusive, very, very unjust abusive relationships. Shouldn't exist on the face of the earth. But even in relationships of that sort, you can have some kind of reciprocity. And if you have reciprocity of some form of recognition, then you have some form of honor. And so they talk about honoring slaves all the time.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's what I imagine and want to somehow.
Oh, can I say about it? No, I'll say it on Friday about hubris and slaves.
Yes, we have time. Approfitto, lo dico in italiano, questo è forse più semplice da comunicare anche agli studenti, che il professor Cairns oggi ha inaugurato un ciclo di 3 incontri che continueranno anche domani e dopodomani. Chiedo a Manuela gli orari precisi per non sbagliare. In entrambi i casi
10-12 ci sono riunioni, ci sono le
sala riunioni al insomma. Ecco, quindi abbiamo omesso di dirlo all'inizio, ma recupero questi riferimenti che faceva il professor Cairns adesso alle sue lezioni nei giorni successivi già. In qualche modo l'ho anticipato. So thank you so much for this first answer. And yes, maybe one can add that some slaves have more opportunity to join and to teammate than others. The epitropoi or the other one who had some responsibilities within the oikos. As Vidal say, all the slaves are equal, but some are more equal than others, and so I think it's also in this case. So I had many other questions, but I don't want to be the only one interacting with Professor Cairns, so I will open to the audience.
We talked about the general concept of honor. Would you say that in ancient Greek culture there was a shared concept of time? Because on one side, I believe that Homeric poems are a base of shared values in Greek society, especially time. But I also believe in multicultural and multi-political Greece. For example, I think that the expression of time was different in different political structures, because in a tyranny, a man was more interested in the face in front of the tyrant, while in aristocrat society, the filia between different aristocrats and also in front of the population was most important. And if you believe that there was a general concept of time, would you say that there was evolution in time, maybe from the archaic period and maybe classic, because humanistic, it was really different, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I agree with everything you say in substantive terms. But I think I agree with what you say in substantive terms because I need to make a certain distinction about the notion of a concept of time. So time isn't one value among many. Time is the value that you place on other values. So it's a mechanism rather than a value in its own right. So that means it can be attached to anything. It can be attached to literally anything, as long as you've got enough people who are willing to endorse that application of it. So it's perfectly clear already in the Homeric poems, but also, I mean, another good source is Aristotle in the Politics, that the things that you get time for can be endless. It can be a very, very long list. So, and context makes all the difference. And in terms of the writings that we read, genre makes a huge difference as well. So I don't know if you've encountered Mimnermus. Have you read him? Mimnermus Fragment 1, where time is all about being attractive to not just members of the opposite sex, but younger members of your own sex. And if you're not, if you're my age and you're old, then you are atimastos. So they put no value on your qualities. And that's all about sexual attractiveness in that context. That doesn't mean that time is sexual attractiveness in that group. It means that they value sexual attractiveness. So time is anything that you value. And therefore, it's going to vary from group to group, from period to period. But I would be hesitant to take a progressivist and evolutionary view of it, simply because the Homeric poems are already very diverse. So one of the problems that people have, one of the mistakes that people have made in talking about honor in Homer, and I'm thinking in particular of the book by Gabriel Hermann called Morality and Behavior in Classical Athens, where he says, in the Homeric poems, you've got this one thing that really matters to everybody called honor. Honor's what they want. And then in Classical Athens, they don't really want that anymore. They've changed their minds. They like other things apart from honor. And it's not the case. So honor attaches to a huge range of different things in Homer, including physical attractiveness, including being a good friend, including being reliable, being trustworthy, including being a good fighter, including killing lots of other people, including having a certain role in society as a housekeeper, for example. So aidoie tamie means the housekeeper who deserves our respect, and so on. So attaches to any role, any circumstance, any value that is in fact valued. So it's already very pluralistic in Homer, and it remains pluralistic all the way through. It's not a monolithic thing, and it's never a single thing. And because it's not a single thing, it can be virtually anything. So the crucial point, I think, is it's not, of course, it's a concept, but it's not a monolithic concept. And as a concept, it denotes a mechanism for valuing rather than the thing that is valued in itself. So, for example, to take a very, very clear and typical example that we'll talk about tomorrow in more detail, in the quarrel of Achilles and Agamemnon in Iliad 1, the point that Nestor makes is that both of these guys, and he makes the point I was making earlier very clearly, both of these guys have a claim to time, but the grounds on which they have it differ. So Agamemnon has it because he is the kinglier, as Nestor says. He rules more people. So his claim derives from his rank. Whereas in the case of Achilles, it's because he's an indispensable fighter. If the Achaeans lose Achilles, then they lose someone they need in this current enterprise that they're engaged in of fighting a war. So their team A rests on skill and not on rank. We also see Team A in Iliad 1 as appraisal respect, because it's about being the best of the Achaeans. Both Achilles and Agamemnon claim to be the best of the Achaeans, so they're looking for someone else to say, yes, he's the best, or he's the best. But it's also about recognition respect, because on the one hand, Achilles expected a reward for being a good fighter, but that reward was promised. There was an agreement that he would get that reward. And the reward was then given. He had the reward, it was in his own possession. And then Agamemnon took the reward back again. So that's not just a matter of appraisal respect. I think Achilles is a good fighter. That's a matter of taking something that belongs to Achilles by matter of right away from him, violating his rights. And that's, in all these cases, that's all about Team A. So it's a very flexible and malleable concept.
Abbiamo contrattato una passatrice di microfono nel frattempo.
Thank you very much. I think that there are at least two main contributions that you have shown today. One is about the intersubjective nature of anything about value, honor, and so on and so forth. And I think that is a quite switch, from one paradigm, of thinking about honor to a completely different paradigm. So I think this is a very important point. The other thing that really struck me is that there's a fundamental confusion in your reassessment. That there's a fundamental confusion in cybernetic terms between the class and the elements of that class.
Exactly.
So that the way we speak about honor is about certain concepts of honor.
That's right.
So I think it is very interesting, what you propose actually, to make this shift, which changes completely the way we think about it. So I think that there's a lot of to really stress.
And that's the answer to the last question as well. So you've also answered that question. But the people who say there's an evolution here from Homer, let's say, to Athens or to the Hellenistic period, say honor used to be, let's say, fighting. And now it's, let's say, being a good citizen, serving the polis. Well, those are two things that are honored. They're two members of the class. But the idea of honor being the value that you place on things hasn't changed at all. It still remains the value that you place on things.
Yeah. Question, I would like to hear your thoughts about the question of the nexus, as I see it, argon honor. I mean, the fact that in many different contexts, text, anything about Time has an agonistic context.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, including Iliad 1. And then, what do you think about the idea of the fluid system? For example, about Donlan, but not necessarily. But the idea of that the Time is something that is there, it's an Islon, and so you either have it, away, or you don't. Because in an agon, actually, there's one person that wins. So that person gets the thing, the Islam. And so in this case, the agon is zero-sum type of game. And there are many contexts in where the agonistic feature comes to the fore, and including the question of the Aristos Achayon, but the Iliad doesn't really say who is, Well, I have an idea, because Iliad 23 shows how, a king should behave in
as far as teammate is concerned, because he behaves as Zeus.
Yeah.
He distributes correctly the team.
Yeah.
So, but the Iliad, the assembly, it's really a fluid system, isn't it? I mean, it's a, I don't know, I would like to hear.
Yeah. So I've come across this notion of the fixed fluid and the fixed system and the fluid system from Donna Wilson in her book about ransom and revenge, which is, I think, a very bad book. Yeah. But on that matter, she's not wrong. So the fixed system is about rank, and the fluid system is about prowess. So anyone who performs well is able to achieve team A in what she calls the fluid system. Whereas you have to be born into the fixed system, you have to be already of that rank. So she's talking about something that's actually much more general than she realizes. She's talking about recognition respect, what you get on the basis of your rank, and appraisal respect that you get on the basis of your performance. So that's a much more widespread phenomenon than she's talking about. And of course, yeah, I mean, both of those things are relevant. That's what I was trying to say. Greek Team A covers appraisal respect and recognition respect, and it also covers all the forms of recognition respect that Darwell talks about. Recognition respect, though, is very rarely a matter of agonistic competition, whereas appraisal respect is. So one good example, we could talk about the funeral games in Iliad 23, but let's talk about a very precise example in Iliad 16, which is when Achilles is sending Patroclus forth, and he says, okay, you're wearing my armor, so people will think that you're me. And go so far, but don't go all the way to the walls of Troy, and do not try to capture Troy. Otherwise, I will appear atimoteros. And there, in that case, capturing Troy is something that he represents there as something that only one person can do, only one of them can do. And if Patroclus were to do it, then he would get that prize, which is then not available for Achilles. So when you stake everything on one single thing, one single mark of honor, then inevitably it looks like zero sum, because there's always an element of social comparison involved in honor. And in some limited circumstances, there can only be one winner and one loser. So in the kind of the Panhellenic games that are celebrated by Pindar and Bacchylides, they don't celebrate second place or third place, only first place. And they talk about the losers slinking off in darkness and, muttering in Phlonos in the background and all this kind of stuff. So in those cases, as in, for example, the anonymous Iamblichi, when he says people don't like to praise because they feel they're losing something, there you've got the impression of zero-sumness. In the funeral games in Iliad 23, it's not really quite like that, is it? So care is taken not just to reward the winner. Sometimes the loser gets the prize because they have a claim to recognition of some sort. So there's more going on than just winning or losing. There's a fantastic set of observations on Team A much, much later in Plutarch, especially in things like De Fraterno Amore, or in the Praeceptare Publicae Gerendae, and so on. And he talks there about even when it is a matter of winning in a competitive endeavor, you should share your success. And if you think about it, that's what's going on in Epinetian poetry. So the person, let's say Hieron, Theron of Akragas, whoever it is, they have won. In these cases, they've won by putting a lot of money into someone else winning on their behalf, and they're already winners in many other senses. But they don't just leave it at that. They publicize their own success, but they also invite other people. And Pindar, as you know, is at pains to say, this isn't just my success, this is all our success. So sharing it is an important social mechanism. That's why fathers in the natal room in the hospital after the birth of a child used to hand out cigars. So they weren't the ones with the huge virility. He was sharing his huge virility with all the other people that were present. So it's important to share success. Otherwise, you get Phlonos, you get envy. In Iliad 1, I think it's rather different again. So that's not a competition. It becomes a competition because things go wrong. But what should happen there is that, you know, Chryses comes. He says, I've got a boundless ransom. I'll give you this boundless ransom if you give me my daughter back. And Agamemnon says no. So there you've got non-zero-sum cooperation. So Agamemnon has something that Chryses wants, his daughter Chryseis. He's prepared to give more than she's worth. So Agamemnon doesn't lose anything. He, in fact, makes a gain. And Chryses gets what really matters to him, his own daughter, on whom he can put no value. Because it's apeiresia apoina, boundless ransom. You can't put a value on the life of your daughter. You will give whatever you have to get your daughter back. So that's what should have happened. And everyone else says that's what should have happened. All the Achaeans say, eideis thai ton hierea, respect the priest. And only Agamemnon says no. So Agamemnon is being very anti-normative in that situation. He's turning something that could have been resolved cooperatively, reciprocally, into something that he wants to make a competition out of. He wants to win some kind of enhanced esteem. He doesn't. In fact, it gets much worse. He then says he's going to take back somebody's prize. And Achilles says, you're not taking back my prize. And he says, oh yes, I'm taking precisely your prize. And Achilles says, well, you can't do that. The prizes have all been given out. So there's a mechanism there for distribution in which success is shared among the people who contributed to the success. And you've got a mechanism of reciprocity. You fight, you get a prize. And those are the rules. And Agamemnon breaks the rules again. So breaking the rules, again, turns it into a competition, but it's not a competitive situation in that regard. These are forms of mutual recognition that Agamemnon is violating. And it only begins to get out of control in Achilles' case when he makes his retaliation against Agamemnon, now that it has become adversarial between the two, not just between him and Agamemnon, but between him and all the rest of the Achaeans. And he prays for the death of many Achaeans, many of his hetairoi, many of his philoi, in order to hurt Agamemnon. And who does he hurt most? Himself. He loses his best friend, his greatest philos, his closest hetairos. I think there's a lesson there about competition and how, when it works, you should let it work and not interfere with the mechanisms. I think it's not simply a matter of agonism in these situations. What should have happened in all the situations was cooperation. Cooperation is the norm, and the community is the one that sets the values in which cooperation is the norm. So Achilles says, the sons of the Achaeans gave me this prize, not you, Agamemnon, gave me this prize. The sons of the Achaeans did it. And he says, you are just taking autos apoura, autos helon, and all this kind of stuff. Autos heletai. So Agamemnon, autos, all by himself, with no reference to anyone else, without taking anyone else's opinion into account, is doing something deeply, deeply anti-normative. He's breaking all the rules. And these are communal rules for cooperative reciprocal interaction.
Altre domande? Professor Sangiolini, che ringraziamo di lettere che ci svolge questo preziosissimo servizio. Grazie.
Thank you very much. My question is a bit of follow-up on Stefano, which addressed one side of the imbalance, the slaves, and my question would concern the upper side, the gods. So how do you see the time in relationship between gods and men? So you had some passages about time between gods. But do you see the same kind of reciprocity?
Yeah.
And I have also another question, if I may. If you could say how do you see the relationship between Time and idols, which are also partly overlapped.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, two good questions again that might take me a little while to answer. The gods. I mean, I would answer your question by simply going to the sources and repeating what they say. So Phoenix says to Achilles in Iliad 9, the gods accept compensation. So they relent from their anger too, even though they are greater in BA and Arete and Time than we are. So the gods are not qualitatively different from human beings. They're only quantitatively different. They have more BA, more power. They have more Arete, they're more excellent, and they have more Time. They have a bigger claim to Time. And their claim, to some extent, is unanswerable. So that means, I think, first of all, that the gods are being drawn within a system that derives from human social values. I mean, let's face it, there are no gods. The gods had to be invented from some material, some resources. And the materials from which they're invented are ordinary features of human social life. So, you know, whether God is a father, whether God is a king, or whatever, there were kings and fathers before there were gods. Equally, there were people with Time before there were gods with Time. And the gods have Time in very much the same way. So that was my point about the Poseidon passage. What he's insisting on is a role that entitles him to a certain amount of freedom to do certain things, in the same way as an Athenian official in a certain arche would have the Time to do a certain amount of things. The term operates in the same way. It has the same kind of function. So I would say, you mentioned something about reciprocity. The difference with the gods is they often don't reciprocate.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have to reciprocate with them if we're human beings, but they don't have to reciprocate with us. They tend not to leave it at that, though. So they don't have to reciprocate, that's true, and often we're disappointed because they don't. But pious people, pious authors, often don't leave it at that. So if you think of Iliad 24, so the debate there about the return of Hector's body, and Apollo says, look, this is a disgrace. Look at what he's doing. You know, it's not only deeply disgraceful, he says it's inhuman. It's the kind of thing an animal would do. And it's also deeply stupid because the body is dead. He says he's ae kisdon, what is it, Kofi and Gaian, dumb earth. So this is just something that's inert that he's maltreating here. It doesn't do him any good, and it doesn't really do anything to the dead body. We have to stop this, he says. So Apollo there is talking, Apollo is not unbiased. Apollo is on the Trojan side, let's face it. But Apollo is talking there about, let's say, universal values of some kind of limit beyond which people shouldn't go. The response then comes from Hera, who says, no. Achilles is our friend. He's the son of one of us. He's got infinitely more Time than Hector. And we can't have any situation where there's only one Time. So she's talking about zero-sum competition there too. She's saying, if you honor Hector, then you're detracting from the honor of Achilles, and that can't be allowed because Achilles is closer to us. He's more our philos than Hector is. What does Zeus say? He says, "Uk esitai mie time." There will not be one Time. More than one person can have Time. We can honor Hector and we can honor Achilles. And what does he say? I'm going to honor Achilles. I'm going to give kudos to Achilles by allowing Achilles to give the body back voluntarily rather than having it stolen by Hermes. So there is another mutuality. So Iliad 24 is very much about mutuality. It's about the mutuality that all human beings share because they're human beings. And it's all about honor as well. Eidos comes into it. So what Achilles is doing is eidesthai priam in that situation. But it's engineered by Zeus as a way of ensuring that on both sides, Trojan and Greek, and two individuals, Achilles and Hector, can both have Time. It doesn't have to be zero-sum. In what I was going to say, the reason I got onto that was to illustrate the point that Zeus makes that argument by saying, look at all the thigh bones that Hector has burnt for us. So Hector will never be as close to the gods as Achilles is because he's the son of a goddess. But still, there's an expectation that if you sacrifice, it will do you some good in the long run. So it didn't save Hector from death, because he has to die. And in fact, Achilles has to die, and Troy has to fall, and all of these things. But still, there's an idea that reciprocity towards the gods needs to be recognized to some extent. And that's just the same as the case of Croesus in Herodotus Book 1, where Croesus complains that, he sent all these gifts to Delphi. And the god at Delphi encouraged him, as he puts it, to invade Persia. And in fact, it's all come to disaster. And why has the god forsaken him? And he gets a response from the Oracle of Delphi. He says, we haven't forsaken you. We did our best. We tried to put it off for as long as possible, but it's not our fault. It was your ancestor Gyges. He caused it all. So they make some kind of argument that suggests that they're not entirely unaware of the requirement to reciprocate, even when they don't. So, yeah, I mean, it's an asymmetrical relationship, just like the master-slave relationship, but it's not a non-reciprocal relationship. There can be reciprocity between people who are very asymmetrically related to each other. And then eidos. Okay, so if you remember Darwal on recognition, respect, and appraisal respect, time is the only word you can use. Well, it's not the only word, but it's the only one of those two words you could use for appraisal respect. So time is one of the words that you could use to signify recognition of someone having achieved something. So you honor them for being a good fighter, a good runner, a good politician, a benefactor towards the state or whatever. You wouldn't use eidos for that. You can use time also of recognition respect. So you honor your friends, you honor your wife, the wife honors the husband, you honor your parents, you use time for all those kind of things, and you can use eidestai for all those kind of things as well. So eidos is only recognition respect when it means respect, whereas time can be appraisal respect and recognition respect. So that's one difference between them. I think another difference is that, yeah, it's going to get very complicated, but when these things are reified, when they become things by ontological metaphor, when they are things that you have or take, getting time is kind of different from getting eidos. So eidos in that connection, think of Theognis in the passage at 237 to 254, where Theognis is saying to Cairns, I gave you wings, blah, 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 and now you fly all over the world. You're on everyone's lips. You're famous. And yet you deceive me as if I was a little boy, and I get no eidos from you. Their eidos is recognition, respect, the kind of thing that you owe someone because they have done something for you. Someone has a special status in your eyes. They have a claim that you need to recognize. You have to factor that into your deliberations. Time is not always, but often much more like a free gift. It can be used of respect that you owe, but it's also used of respect that you give absolutely freely.
Altre domande?
Yep. Another one at the back.
Sempre sì. Seconda puntata, prego.
So, time in deities is not qualitative but quantitative. But
Time in, I didn't catch the word there.
In gods.
In gods, okay, yeah.
So it's quantitative. By who? By mortals, by humans, because they are praised, they are recognized as superior.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I didn't mean that the time that gods receive is necessarily quantitative. I said the difference between gods and humans in terms of time is quantitative. They have more. They're entitled to more.
Because of devotion.
Because they're gods.
So it's innate in that.
Well, only insofar as human beings have imagined it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the world.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
imagine,
yeah.
And then I had a second question, but it's really specific, so maybe privately, but if you can answer,
Okay.
it's okay. Because I'm writing about the definition code 11 of
Olympian 11.
Alexidamo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I'm trying to collect some proof about the aristocratic structure in Apollo in the 5th century.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting the fact that Faisco, the father of Alexidamo, I had this question because you talked about agonistic expression. And in this case, in this definition hold, Bakile says that Alexidamo failed and didn't
previously
in the Olympic Games. So it's like if Faisco wants to prove to the Metaponto society that his son is worthy. So is interested in his face in front of population, and not maybe an higher man or family. So would you think that this could be a proof of a non-democratic but aristocratic structure in this period in Metaponto? Because Faisco is interested in the opinion of people, not someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks very much. As you know, that's one of my favorite odes. I wrote an article about that. I like it very much. It's interesting there that the story that's told about the Achaeans as the mythic portion of the ode has very big ramifications. It spreads out a long way, very far beyond Metapontum. So it's for the entire community of Metapontum, but it's placing that community in a much bigger context of a migration that came from mainland Greece at an earlier stage. So it's putting them on some kind of wider stage. So that's, if you notice, a difference between, let's say, Bacchylides 3, 4, and 5 for Hieron, where it's never a matter of what the Syracusans have achieved and how the Syracusans fit into the Panhellenic stage or anything like that. So I tend to think that in these cases where you get Panhellenic myths and where you get myths about the illustrious nature of the city and the city's traditions and the city's background and the city's religion and all that kind of stuff, that it's because you've got some kind of more or less collective mindset going on there. Now, that could be an aristocrat in a certain context having to negotiate their status vis-a-vis the people, but we don't really know whether Phaiscos and Alexidemus were aristocratic or not. I think we do know that Metapontum in the 5th century was democratic. It's got one of the biggest assembly ecclesiae in the entire Greek world. So the excavations of Joe Carter down there are I think, incontrovertible on that.
But it was really big. It was bigger than the dimension for, I don't remember who studied it, for the number.
Yeah, I think it's Joe Carter.
Yeah, it was too big.
Yeah.
Maybe others believe that it was more ideal for spectacular or in general shows.
Yeah. I mean, I think when Carter first published his findings, the assumption was it was very big, but it was very big because it needed to accommodate a lot of people. I guess we'll never know. but I think you don't build a big ecclesia unless you want to say something about your affiliations as a polis, you know, and your aspirations as a polis. You want to have a big citizen body taking part in deliberations. So yeah, I mean, I just don't know in that case. But I would draw a distinction between odes for tyrants in Pindar and Bacchylides, which are very much normally all about the tyrant, who, you know, to take the standard Leslie Kirk model, doesn't really need much by way of approval from his fellow citizens. Let's face it, he's the tyrant whether they like it or not. And other odes, for in particular the Pindar's odes and, you know, Bacchylides 9 as well, for citizens of different kinds of polis, especially the Aeginetan polis, where it does seem as though the important thing to tell an Aeginetan is how great Aegina is, and not how great individuals within Aegina are. So there's a certain amount about the family, there's a certain amount about the victor, but it's always in the context of, aren't we Aeginetans fantastic? Don't we have these long traditions? Are we not related to the Iacidae and all this kind of stuff? So those are, I think that's really my point that I was trying to make in the paper, that it's the community that sets these values. You can see that although the victor's father will have gone to Pindar or Bacchylides and said, write me an ode for my son, it's not all about what that family wants. That family has to do something also that the community wants, in some cases at least anyway.
Thank you, Leonardo.
So first of all, I wanted to thank you for the discussion because it was really illuminating. I have to admit that when I first came to this class, I had many stereotypes on the honor society. So it was really deconstructing. I don't know how to say. By the way, I can't help but to notice some connection between the conception of honor and the Christian society, for example, where I grew up. And so my question is, how did it change the concept of honor in our Christian society? How did Christianity influence the conception? Did it get stronger or weaker, or maybe it simply stayed normal? I don't know. This was my question.
Okay. Yeah, I think I really can't give an answer to that. First of all, because it's not my period. Secondly, because I don't come from a Christian background myself. So my father was in the Communist Party. We had very little to do with the Christian church when I was growing up. And you know, I don't really go much further than Plutarch on the Greek side, and I'm much more interested in pagan Greeks than I am in Christian Greeks, sadly. So the quick answer is I really don't know what they say. I mean, I've encountered sources where the same terms are occurring, and I've read things by colleagues such as Martin Hinterberger on much later Greek Christian literature, Byzantine literature, where they are still using terms like time and eidos and eiskune. And they're using them almost precisely as they're used in classical literature. But Martin tells me that everyday Byzantine Greeks barely knew what those things meant. So by, I don't know, by the 12th century, they're not thinking, for example, of eidos anymore. They're talking about entrope or dropi, as it is in modern Greek. So the terminology changes. So I wouldn't like to pontificate about things that I know nothing about.
So I'm just seeing, yeah. Yes. Of course, if someone also from the video conference wants to intervene and pose a question, here. Also for that, are there anyone else? Yes, one back there. Sorry. Many coffees.
So first of all, I want to thank you for the discussion. That has been really interesting. Here's my question. Thinking about the context of representation of the tragedy and about the ambiguity and complex of the tragedy of the changes that it is made, I also think that reputation and respect for a character is something that can change really easily. So I was wondering, how could the public in the 5th century relationate the concept of Timea and recognition of Timea with all the rapid changes and conflicts of values that the law shows them? And also, if the tragedy was a way to evaluate and put to the test not only the idea of citizens of Timea, but also their ability and capacity, and their ability to recognize what is honorable.
Right. Can you tell me a bit more about what you're thinking of in terms of all the changes that you say are going on?
Dialogo continuato.
Can you repeat this?
So you said something about how in the midst of all this turmoil of changes and so on, how can they maintain notions of Timea or whatever? What are the changes you have in mind?
For example, the changes of values during particular tragedy, like I don't know, just only the conflicts between in Antigone, the idea of Antigone and the other side Creonte, the fact that there are different ways of justifying what is done to Polynesians, so also the fact that Antigone talks about Timea and about Natimea, while Creonte talks about Timea in a different way. Yeah. For example, in the interpretation of this tragedy.
Yeah. Get some exercise. Thanks. Yeah, so I think the answer to that kind of question, given that people in a multivocal, polyphonous genre like tragedy, but several people speaking with different points of view, the fact that they represent different notions of what would be the honourable thing to do, what would be shameful, what would be honourable, simply illustrates my point that this isn't one value among many. This is a mechanism for identifying what it is that you value. So Antigone and Creon value different things. Whether we want to see that in Hegelian terms of household versus polis, which even Hegel didn't think. So Hegel is much more complicated than people say. There's household on both sides. There's polis on both sides. Or even just men versus women or whatever. I think there's nothing fundamentally changing there. It's always been possible that different people value different things. And Timea just means value. So pluralism of value has always been possible in Greek thought. And pluralism of value is very often articulated in terms of Timea. So when people disagree, very often what they disagree over is what is the thing that will get us Timea? What is the thing that someone who wants Timea should do in this situation? Because it's not always clear. So it's not clear, for example, for Achilles in Iliad 9. So what should he do? Should he hold out for more Timea in the future? And if he does, will he get it? Or should he take the Timea that's being offered to him now, in the moment? And should he do that because Agamemnon is now giving him material goods that make amends for the offense he's created? Or should he do it because the people who are offering these material goods are his friends? So there are many reasons in play there already. And I think we just get a proliferation of reasons in later contexts too. But one thing I think that does change just in terms of the usage of the terminology is that there's more emphasis in tragedy on what I was talking about in terms of the internal aspect of time, or the intrinsic aspect of time. So tragedy is able, through the way that the terminology and the language has changed between, let's say, Homer and the 5th century, to put more emphasis on what individuals think of themselves. So you get situations such as the one we have at the end of Euripides' Heracles, where Heracles is deeply ashamed of what he's done. He's killed his own children. And he simply wants to disappear from the face of the earth. And it doesn't really matter to him that he was driven mad by a goddess when he did this. So his intentions don't come into it. The fact that he's done this terrible thing is enough for him. And it's his judgment that he's done this terrible thing that's enough for him. And we have uses of the verb eideomai that, unlike the way the verb is used in Homer, refer to what he has already done. So he says, eideomai, what is it? Tois ergos. He's ashamed of what he's done. He's using the verb retrospectively to look at the past, and he's using it of his own judgment of himself, rather than being concerned, as Hector was in the passage I showed you from the Iliad, about what other people will think about him. But what happens there is that Theseus then arrives. So Heracles won't listen to his father. His father tells him, don't be too hard on yourself. You couldn't possibly have known. It's okay. But he's still distraught. He wants to die. He wants to disappear. When Theseus, his friend, arrives, he gives him an alternative perspective. So what's happening there is not someone who cares about what other people think, then being somehow driven to focus on what really matters to them as an individual. You've got someone who doesn't care at all about what other people think, who takes a very negative view of his own actions, who's then given a different perspective on those actions by a friend. And that, I think, is a different way of looking at what's going on from the way that Hector, for example, looks at things in Iliad 22. And in the use of terms like sunaidesis and sunesis and so on, Euripides, Orestes again, and all these retrospective uses of the verb aiskunomai and aiskunestai, you've got a much bigger sense of people judging themselves in terms of their values of honor, rather than exposing themselves to the judgment of other people. I think there's no real difference in what's going on. There's no real difference in situation. It's still a matter of how we judge ourselves and how that relates to how other people judge us. There's still two sides of the picture, but the emphasis has shifted slightly. So that round about the same time as these tragedies of Euripides, you can have someone like Democritus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, in his ethical writing, saying, we shouldn't be concerned about what other people think of us. What matters is what we think of ourselves. And instead of eideistai towards other people, so heteros or alus eideistai, what we must do is heautos, heauton eideistai. We must feel eidos before ourselves. So that, I think, is not impossible in Homer in terms of practice, but it's impossible in Homer in terms of language. It doesn't happen in Homer. You don't get reflexive verbs in Homer. So those things have changed. At least the articulation of the values has changed a little bit. But I wouldn't go much further than that. So I'm kind of against the grand sweeping narratives of development and progress, because I don't think things do progress to that extent. They change, but they don't change completely.
Thank you.
I was curious to know how we can associate this social system based on honor to the women in ancient Greek society. since of course in India we are presented this system in a context which is dominated by men.
Yeah.
And also we are limited in this field of analysis.
Mhm,
This is viewing women through the eyes of male authors and poets. So yes.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. So all of this is, it's not women's voices, it's men's representations of women's voices, even when we do get women's voices. We do get quite a lot of women's voices in Homer, though, and I think it's probably a good idea to pay attention to them. And you can read those voices in various different ways. But even though the female characters of the Homeric poems are being represented for, let's say, audiences that are at least strongly characterized by male values, even if they included women, even so, there's a notion there that women do matter. So there's a contrast very definitely being drawn in the passage I mentioned already in Iliad 1 between the sense in which Chryseis matters to her father, which is as a daughter, and the sense in which she matters to Agamemnon, which is as a possession. And women, of course, are possessions in Homer to a great extent. They're exchanged like possessions. They can be exchanged for other objects such as tripods and that kind of thing. But even so, kind of like the question about slaves in classical Athens, it doesn't exclude women from the nexus of relationships and interrelationships based on honor. So, for example, why did Odysseus' father not sleep with Eurycleia? He didn't want to dishonor his wife. Why did Phoenix agree with his mother that he should kill his father? Because she felt she was being dishonored by the fact that the father had taken a concubine. So in these relationships of sexual partner and wife, honor is operative as well. And as I was saying earlier on too, just about any woman, slave or free, in the Odyssey can be described as aidoie, as deserving of respect. It's just an honorific epithet for women of a variety of different classes, some of whom are like Eurycleia, she's called aidoie, and all the way up to Penelope, who's also called aidoie. So despite the huge differences of rank, despite the huge differences of status, free and slave, nonetheless, the ideology is at least that these people deserve respect, they deserve honor. So it's difficult to think of anyone, in Homer at least, and maybe also, we'll come to this on Friday, but maybe also in Athenian society as well, who is absolutely, irretrievably, and completely beyond the remit of this system of honor. It's possible to participate in it even though your status can be very, very limited, even though the constraints on your status can be very profound. So this clearly is a hierarchical kind of society. So although Athenian democracy has a strong ideology of egalitarianism, that's only for citizens, and there are lots of people who are not citizens, so it's very hierarchical there. Homeric societies are hierarchical too, but it's not about people who have honor and people who don't. And honor isn't something that matters only to the people at the top of the tree, it matters also to people at the bottom of the tree.
If I can add something to this point, for women in Athens, first of all, they are considered citizens as men. There is a female mode of saying citizen, politis as politis. And so this is very important. It's something that for long has been completely neglected or undermined, but it is a very strong.
Well, my teacher, Douglas McDowell, when I was a student, so I went to university in 1979, and in one of the very first classes, McDowell said, this idea that women weren't citizens is completely wrong. They were politides, they were citizens.
but he was Marco McDowell, so there was, of course, ahead of the common sense about this. And there are some specific examples of time assigned to women. For example, Elbilda's mother in the Boston speech, where he is fighting being to staying as a citizen in Athens. She worked at the market, and that was one of the reasons why the counterpart wanted to see her as not citizen, not fit to be citizen. And Elbilda say, do not dishonor a citizen because it's poor. And he's talking about his mother, because that's where everything started in the speech. So it is clear that the mother participates in the honor of herself, but even of the family, because of course she just married to the son who is citizen because the mother is citizen.
Lysias won as well. So Lysias won against Eratosthenes. Euphilitus, the speaker, says he's dishonored me and he's dishonored my wife. So many people say that when it's a matter of committing hubris against the wife of a citizen, it's an offense against the citizen and not offense against the wife. It's an offense against the wife as well.
Yes, absolutely. The second example was Moike. You anticipated. But there's a sort of atimia for the women involved in Moike, some gestures, some public way of showing,
stripping them of their jewelry.
Absolutely. So women are completely part of this dynamic.
So our excellent Italian PhD student in Edinburgh, Linda Rocchi, book forthcoming next year on atimia in Athens, has a whole chapter on the atimia of women and how women, there's a mechanism for formal atimia of women in Athens as well.
Yes, and that was a really important study who goes deep inside this this question. So yes, I just wanted to add this little.
And our other PhD student, Bianca Mazzinghi-Gori, who's now in Torino, she points out that even newborn children have time in Greek thought. So she has a book coming out on the time of women, children, and slaves.
It's getting wider. Yes, okay. So, qualche intervento, domanda? So, I would have a few more, but I think that we abuse enough of your time and your patience today. And so I want to say thank you to Diletta to help us with the discussion, to Alessandro Carli to help us with the online virtual conference. But first of all, thank you again to Professor Douglas Cairns for this wonderful lecture.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you very much.
Great generosity to serve in the discussion. And tomorrow